Retail Podcast, a global conversation hosted by Alex Resvan Viennet.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Retail Podcast. Today we have the great pleasure of having someone who, when I saw their work, when I read what she had been all about, I just found it so fascinating that it was something that you just felt like, oh my God, there's such a great conversation to be had. And that's because Kate Machtiger, who you guys can see. Again, Kate cannot see me, so it's very disconcerting for her. I do need to resolve this technical problem I have of people talking to the podcast and not being able to see me. But she kindly agreed to give up some of her time during these crazy times that we're all living in. Kate, for those who don't know who she is and what her studio is about, she recently wrote a really interesting piece for the Harvard Business Review, which is all about what will the retail experience of the future look like, which I highly recommend. But that's not just, that's like the tip of the iceberg when you look at Kate and what her portfolio and the things that she works on. She has her own studios, the Extraterrestrial Studios. She brings her strategic vision and complex thought process to simplify these spaces. And I will let Kate talk about these sorts of things when we get in. But it's also the fact that she approaches it from a design perspective. So this is what I would class as our typical podcast, where we talk about, retail in the traditional sense, but we're now looking at it from a different angle. Why? Because we want to create this global conversation. So Kate, thank you so much for giving the hour or so to join me on the studios. Where are you in the world for those watching or listening to us?
Thanks so much, Ali. I'm honored to be on the podcast, and I'm coming to you from Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
Oh, wow. Okay. So are you guys in lockdown, as in, because I've had different guests in different sort of phases of lockdown. What's COVID life like for you guys?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're sort of starting to phase out. New York was early in all of the cases, so we sort of had the worst of it in March and April, and I actually had it in March.
Oh my
So now
goodness.
I'm sort of like a free agent, a
Oh,
little
wow.
bit more, although of course we don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, things are opening up. There's sidewalk cafes. It's feeling very European here suddenly.
Oh.
Got a lot more pedestrianized space. It's great.
Oh, that's fantastic. Very good. Well, I suppose you're looking at it from a design perspective. Again, for the people that have not had a chance to read the review or don't know that much about you, could you sort of talk a little bit about your studio, about the museum work that you've done in terms of the future of spaces? What is the focus of what is hot for you right now and stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So my studio, Extraterrestrial, we're focusing on developing what I call deep space, which is space that's more than just the surface level, the background that, a lot of retail has been focused and experiences over the last few years on being Instagram ready. And I find that really lacks some of the depth that are the memorable places that we go back to throughout our lives. And so I'm interested in creating spaces that have that greater tactility, sensory depth, whether it's the smells or the sounds or, it's the interesting thing is I was focused a lot on the textures and what you touch when you go into a store or pop up or an experience. And right now with COVID, that's really been limited. So I'm thinking a lot about how do you communicate those same feelings through digital, through renderings, animation. I have a lot of great, you mentioned the new museum. I'm in an incubator there called New Ink. It's all designers, artists, technologists, and there's so many people doing crazy things with VR, AR, motion design. And so they're really inspiring, and I've been talking to them a lot about how does that translate into retail and how do you bring some of that? And maybe it's just at the brand level, maybe it's the brand advertisements or, what they're publishing online.
Yeah.
But how do you capture the feeling of being in a store when you can't go there?
I got you. And in terms of just as a side note, but this is a personal curiosity, the augmented reality that you're seeing that people sort of experiment with, is that, if you like, the customer journey, or is what you were saying there, is it more about interaction with brands? So is it, for example, for uses within retail spaces, or more to, I mean, what are they, what directions are they
Yeah,
pointed?
I think it's very early. I'd say the most places I'm seeing it right now is like fashion is really having an overhaul in terms of how they think about Fashion Week. And, there's so much waste environmentally that goes into those kinds of
Yeah.
events. And they're finally, that's, on stage right now, and people are thinking a lot about that. And then you think about the risks this year with COVID. So I think a lot of it is just really early days, like because I had done some work a few years ago. That was actually the impetus for the Forbes 30 under 30, working with the government about how do we stimulate more activity in VR and AR to help bring it into the classroom.
Yeah.
And so working with HoloLens and also Oculus and Samsung. And the hard thing is it's sort of this chicken and the egg, as I'm sure you know, where like until people have the hardware, you can't really make the content.
Yeah.
And once the content's great, like, you have to have this reason to buy it. And if ever there was a reason, it would be right now. But I think people are just so overwhelmed. Like maybe it's coming with all this remote work.
I definitely think we're on the cusp in terms of this this digital, physical, and how people, especially in some parts of Europe, have been locked in their houses for up to 3 months. Their experiences and how they interact with things has changed. It's gone back or has changed for good. And so these new technologies, such as augmented reality or digital experiences, is what people want. But where you see the disconnect is exactly what's happening, in the sense that people want more digital experiences, but when they go into retail, they're sort of met with this, I don't know, 100-year-old way of doing things. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are changes happening, but it's hard. Retail, I mean, you look in New York, like these stores are just hanging on by a thread. So the incentive to invest like that much in technology right now, like some of the people I'm talking to who have stores around New York, they're thinking about like the lower investment things like apps and QR codes and AR from the phone, that kind of stuff. I think because everybody has their own devices and it's all your germs are already on it, so you're not getting anybody else's germs by picking up another piece of technology. So I think that, it's things like how do we take that Pokemon Go energy and bring that into retail right now.
I noticed you did the Tupperware pop-up in Manhattan. I don't know, in Soho in Manhattan before Christmas. How did that go? And I mean, what do you feel were some of the outcomes of that? Because it looked it looked amazing in terms of the visual side of it.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a really interesting project. The funny thing, we're looking back on that and realizing like we sort of designed a post-COVID environment without meaning to, just because of all the constraints we had. We had such a limited space. It was basically we had 3 weeks to design and build it from when we got the project to when it opened, and the space we had was an old restaurant. So and we couldn't really change anything because a pop-up, you can't really go in and knock everything down. You sort of have to give it back as you took it. So it was like, what can we do with paint and vinyl and a couple of extra fixtures? And so we didn't have that much space to put the product, just enough so that everything was there and visible, but not enough to have shelves and shelves of stuff that people could handle and take up to the register. So we ended up having all the merchandise in the back. And then you could approach an assistant and say, I'd like to buy this and this and this. And they would go and wrap it up and put it in a little tote bag. And Tupperware has been really into sort of sustainability of their product. I think they get a bad reputation because they're made of plastic, but the idea is it's reusable. So it was interesting, like a lot of the trends that we were using, and we were using iPads and Square, and a lot of the things we were doing actually could be relevant to today. It just happened because of the constraints. So, I mean, sometimes New York is good for that. There's enough constraints that we're out there making new things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I said, that sort of touchless environment that you created is absolutely what retailers are trying to create now. I don't know if it was just now that you said, or I read in one of the things you said about Instagrammable stores. or
Mm.
tell me what I mean. What is that for you? What does it
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, I think I had a level of frustration, even at events and festivals and all these things, that it felt flat, like felt like a movie set that you were moving through, that really wasn't something that you were going to personally remember having a good time there.
Yeah,
That you were, it was just built so that you had this evidence to post to other people, and it didn't really create, like, a lot of brands are investing in that kind of thing because it's measurable, because you could say we got this many hashtags, this many likes, but
yeah,
the actual experience, I mean, once people get that one photo, they're never coming back. So if you design your whole store around an Instagrammable moment, you're only going to get that one touch point.
yeah,
Versus right now, like, imagine you had this wonderful experience where you felt so calm and so just an escape from the world.
yeah,
That's where you would want to go back right now.
yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I was going to ask you, is that biolithic? What is it? Biophilic?
Biophilic, yes.
Tell me about.
Yeah,
I read. Tell me about that.
I have a good friend in the New Ink incubator that I've actually been working with through this, and she's been doing incredible things. I'm so proud of just everything that she's done. She runs a company called Studio Elsewhere, and they are in Mount Sinai hospitals right now, building out these rooms for doctors and nurses and frontline healthcare workers to recharge during all this crazy, the surge they're experiencing.
Yeah,
So, but I mean, her work is really, she came from video games, but really is focused on nature, imbuing nature into these really stark, unwelcoming places. And there's
right.
so much research to show that nature, and biophilic is basically just like environments that imitate nature. So you don't have to be outside to get the same benefits you get from nature.
Oh, I see.
There's a biophilic council, I think, and they highlight a lot of the top projects. But for example, like Etsy,
Yeah,
their headquarters in New York, like everything is designed with this idea that you should feel like you're back out in nature as you're walking through their office in like really subtle ways, whether it's the amount of light or the plants or the color scheme. I think the idea is like our bodies evolved in a context that when you take us out of it,
yeah.
it's not that healthy for us.
And is that something that comes into your design, sort of when you're looking at design and designing spaces? Because I notice on your website some of the designs that you have, obviously they're not nature. I mean, they have natural elements like water or waves or colors of that. Is that something that you build into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a store, plants always just add like this extra level if you don't have them. There's, first of all, they're air purifying. So, I mean, that's going to be a huge thing coming out of this. But yeah, I think they bring like a sense of groundedness and home. Though, I mean, I just like admire and love everybody who's focused on biophilic and natural looking environments. There's part of me that's always been like a surrealist, and the fantasy
Yeah,
and the sort of Dali and Warhol, like the craziness.
yeah. Well, you talk
So
about
it's always
theatre.
a struggle.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned theatre, and obviously theatre in the context of a retail space, not necessarily in the operational element, but having that, in my mind, coming out of your being taken away for a moment to another destination, which is potentially a moment of delight, is the magic, right?
Mhm.
That's where the magic happens, where people feel something, and I think that's
Definitely.
another thing that you sort of write about in terms of how do you, what was it making, yeah, in the article you talk about making people feel something. What
Yeah.
for you, what does that represent? Is that textures, is that textile, is that moments?
Yeah, I mean, I had just read this book and I was kicking myself that I didn't read it earlier, called The Eyes of the Skin.
Okay.
It's sort of a weird sounding, gross sounding title, but it's very good. It's an architecture book.
Okay.
And it's about how our eyes perceive space and perceive texture, and how much, our modern era has neglected some of these things that can actually be so comforting to us, whether it's stone or brick or wood textures, but also like how, when how our senses are so interconnected. So you might look at a piece of wood and you know what it would be like to touch that because you have had that experience in the past. So
Right.
we don't actually have to touch things for them to feel something to us. subconsciously. And so I'm interested in how that can be added, especially in these touchless environments we're going into. But the theater side of it, I mean, I've always loved, like, I've been inspired by Disney and like theme parks. I think there is that like sort of experience of, and I think it informs my approach to designing experiences. I did a lot of theater sets, like building them in high school, and taking somebody on a journey, this idea that whatever they see doesn't have to be reality. I think
Right.
that's definitely what attracted me to retail and pop-ups over like architecture purely.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I didn't mention when I was going through your bio is the fact that you have worked in several different verticals like finance and architecture. This wasn't, you didn't sort of come out of academia straight into design. You've sort of taken a journey here.
Oh yeah, no, it was a winding journey.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I did architecture undergrad and civil engineering. I had this great joint program I was a part of, and then found like engineering was a little more clear cut. And then I got the pull into investment banking, into finance. I mean, it was just
I can
that
see
sort
the
of thing you
correlation.
do.
Architecture,
I mean, it
investment
doesn't quite
banking.
like make sense, but yeah. I mean, I think I did some internships in architecture, and I realized that you're not actually the one making the decision most of the time. It's the person with the money who gets to decide what happens.
Yeah.
So I was like, what if I became the person with the money? So I worked in real estate investment banking, because I was super interested in that side of it, like being able to sit across the table from, let's say, the CEO of a huge hotel company or a huge real estate empire, and like understand what they think about and how they make decisions. That was fascinating to me.
Yeah,
And
no,
then it took a while to get back to what I love.
yeah, you mentioned something that I thought was quite funny, and not funny in the sense, but you talked about Gen Z's funneling. I have to read it, but with millennials and Gen Z's funneling themselves into ever narrow aesthetic tribes. And I was thinking, oh, hang on a minute, that sounds like I may be a Gen Zer. What's the aesthetic tribe that I've funneled? But then I had to go off and do some research. What is aesthetic tribe? Then they ended up on postmodernism and how that goes. But I'm just curious in terms of this this sort of view of aesthetic tribes. Can you sort of expand a little bit for those of us who are not necessarily versed in this? What?
I mean, it's because like I'm the biggest fan of Gen Z. Like I want to be Gen Z. I follow like everything they do. It's very cool. I mean, it's a mix of like, I'm on TikTok. We'll see if that gets deleted here in the US, but Depop, like where all the sort of, I think there's this energy towards, I mean, I think it's a mix of being always visible on social media your entire life, but also being very jaded about it. So they would rather, find their own little niche than maybe the millennial stereotype is a little bit more of, everybody following the same trend of everybody getting avocado toast. Yeah. So Gen Z is very much like, I'm going to have this niche of I follow this artist and this, musician, and this is my little group. I mean, you see like the BTS fans on Twitter and everything they've done politically over the last month or so. It's like, there are these little tribes of people that you focus around a shared interest and you find each other through the internet. And I think that carries over into real life too.
So how does that have an impact on design then? So when you're looking at experiences and then building an experience, does that cause a sort of adds a layer of complexity, or do you take it?
Yeah, I think it's actually a great thing for e-commerce, because I think e-commerce right now, it's pretty boring. I think if anybody who's spent time over this quarantine, browsing out of boredom on some kind of website, everything looks the same, and there's not a lot of curation or differentiation. So I do think it's an opportunity for those brands that know they have a specific audience to just say, we're not going to have like these white grid system. We're going to do something quirky and fun, and that really resonates with their brand. And I think some like beauty brands are starting to see that. They're starting to be like a little bit more cheeky with their slogans and their, every button you click has like a funny little, very on brand message. But I think there's more opportunity for that. And then I think for the retail context, it's a little harder because you don't know who's going to walk in your store. But and you're seeing stores like Toto Kylo, for instance, which was like, a very specific, I don't know, cool sort of more than New York, like, that sort of hipster group aesthetic is not doing well. So I don't know, like I'm still learning, as we all are, who's going to survive this and whether that actually is a good model or whether that's the first thing people abandon and they just go to Walmart and call it a day.
Go back. Well, I mean, again, it's like with luxury. Does luxury have this massive boom? I mean, I've spoken about luxury in the sense that I feel that luxury has to sort of mature in the sense that beyond the brand, beyond the expense, what does it stand for? What are their values? How does it make you feel? And in that sense, how does luxury grow up in a sense, which is what I think COVID is forcing a lot of retailers to do. But again, bringing luxury, because you talk about how the power of experience is directly correlated with brand perception.
I mean, I do think luxury, there has been over the last few years this switch from, and people have parodied it, that luxury has become just like what's novel and weird, because the sort of in your face money. And same with during COVID, this whole Instagram influencer thing, like people are losing interest in that. People don't care. There's nothing
shallow, right? It's like,
And it's like Kim Kardashian tweeting about all of her horses when when all these people are in the hospital. Like, it's feeling a little tone deaf. But I think what has been getting a lot of traction in luxury has been this sort of very weird, unexpected mixes of nostalgia. And that maybe has more runway, maybe that, but then the whole thing just becomes how weird can you make this experience, which is great. I'd love to be hired for that. But I don't know, like, will there be this point where people will think, well, that's not essential? I mean, I think maybe the line is blurring between luxury and art, and maybe that's a good thing.
Well, I think Burberry have definitely tried to do that. I mean, I've been to a couple of times in their flagship store on Regent Street where they've had massive art installations with artists building completely random art, nothing to do with the brand, nothing to do, but it's like, and it was fascinating. But I did ask myself, is this a destination? Is that what they're doing? Is that an expression of freedom? Is that art for art's sake? Right? I was trying to sort of connect the dots. And it was a wonderful installation in terms of it was on 3 layers, but I didn't buy anything. I didn't, come out with a Burberry handbag. Well, maybe I'm not going to come out with a Burberry handbag anyway. But in terms of, I went for the experience, but then I guess where's the trade-off for the retailer to turn that into profitability, into increasing that?
I think that's a big question for them, and I think that's why, like, a lot of, even within beauty, I was just talking to somebody, like, they're focused on Asia because there's still an interest in the true luxury, like traditional. And, a lot of the markets here have moved towards this. Oh, it has to be weird and artsy, but then the audience you're attracting might not be the audience that's buying.
What comes to mind when you talk about that is Showfields in New York. And I'm unfair or unkind to the concept of entertainment.
I didn't personally enjoy it either, but.
It's like a little kid like a little kid trying to make sense of why am I going down a slide and the first thing, and it's funny, I said this to someone, the first thing you see after you go through the slide is a sponge, an antibacterial sponge. Are you going to sell many of those sponges? And then the person on the other side of the interview said, "Yeah, I actually bought one of the sponges." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, maybe." But that's just I try to observe and sort of look at it from an outsider's perspective, and that's where I see the people weren't connecting the experience and the dots together, as in, and you talk about this as physical spaces as an escape, and so I can understand that in the sense of a Showfields sort of term where they're saying, well, you may buy something, you may not, but this space will take you away from make you feel giddy again and make you feel young, so you interact. But I mean, yeah, what's your view in terms of creating spaces that are, for, as you talk about, escape, but don't necessarily then tie back to some sort of harsh commercial metric?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. I think with show fields, I think there are great parts of it, and I'm glad that they're experimenting with the retail model and presenting something new. I did find like the experience of it maybe felt more like a pop-up.
Yeah.
And in that way, maybe it feels less luxurious, but I mean, it was interesting. It's interesting to explore. And I do like the multi-floor model, like Dover Street
Yeah.
Market here has a really cool way of doing that. So there are like subtleties in it. I think it's not just like, oh, because it's new, it's this thing, and it's the old model, it's that thing. I think that's what I'm interested in is like the subtleties of like the light and the material and those elements being part of whether you walk away having had a good time or not. But I do think the escape and like the playground elements are something I'm excited about. It's going to be more challenging after this. I think we've become so focused on like the numbers for every single tiny interaction because we have them, right? So you can look at the data. You can look at whether somebody bought something, if they went on your site for 15 minutes, and then it becomes, oh no, how do I eliminate less clicks so that they can get directly to the item they need? Optimizing for every data point. Yeah. And I just don't think that like creates a lasting connection with the brand. So I think there needs to be some leaders who have the guts to say, we're not going to see this direct correlation right away, but every time that person has to go buy like something special, a gift, it's their birthday, this is the shop they come to because they have a good time here. Yeah. And then you have to have great products too. You can't like have a really fun experience and then sell something people don't want. Yeah. That was always happening whenever I went to South by Southwest. That was always the problem, is that it'd be a really cool house of like really cool experiences, but the product they were selling was like fertilizer, and you're like, okay. I'm not sure what to make of this. So yeah, it has to be authentic.
100% about the authentic. You talk about digital experience as collective memory. Can you just sort of, is that tapping into people's sort of experiences from past life, as in like when they were younger, and then bringing that along into the stage that you're creating? Is that you just?
Yeah, I mean, I think of that. I was talking there about sort of the digital expression of brands, and sometimes these like, videos on Instagram or wherever they live on their website. I think there is a lot of discussion right now in fashion, some of the brands that I've talked to about nostalgia, and a lot of them, that's like at the heart of their brand, and they're trying to figure out how to communicate that same feeling when they don't have a store that represents what they're expressing, or they maybe don't have a fashion show where they can bring in all those elements as part of the set. Yeah. So how do they bring it into video? But the hard thing is then you have to have a shared childhood experience or teenage experience or whatever it is. Yeah. It has to be somewhat universal, and that's hard to do. I think with the conversations around diversity and equity, like, if you're a brand your nostalgia is based in this specific experience that's maybe quite exclusive, how are you going to connect with everybody else? But I do think there is power in it, and I think over quarantine, for whatever reason, people have been gravitating towards more nostalgic things. Maybe being trapped at home reminds us of being kids and teenagers where we weren't allowed to, we couldn't move as freely as we can now.
Do you know, I've not shared this with anyone, even with my own family, but it was the only time in 30 years where I started thinking about my school days. And wow. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what John is doing or what Sarah's up to, onto Facebook, have a look. And then it was early in March. I mean, I don't know what I'm sharing. There's nothing to do with the podcast. But anyway, it's just that you mentioned that. I don't know if that's a phenomenon that people went through.
A lot of people I talked to have been having this happen. And like, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one. For me, the memories, I was like going back to middle school and like, the little like lip gloss, or whatever was popular, the makeup or the snacks or like the little things that were very, I don't know how to taste or
Yeah.
smell.
Yeah.
The more I talk to people, the more I've seen everybody has been having these waves of like memories coming back. Maybe it's the first time we're like alone with our thoughts
Yeah,
for a long
I
time.
think the more restricted humans become, the greater the need for expression of a time when they were free, and that's why you then revert back. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but anyway, that was my,
Hmm.
my take on it. That people are looking for when was the last time they were free, right? And
Yeah.
to take them away from the constraint of lockdown. Because I think
Oh, definitely.
that's what I thought. But anyway, that's it. In terms of you looking at, because obviously you've done pop-up stores, you're looking at different design aspects. How do you see the rest of the year spanning out in terms of
Mm.
just in the sense of your work and stuff and the direction
Yeah.
that you take it from a studio perspective?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I had intended to really like launch the studio in earnest this spring, um, with a big project. And
Yeah,
obviously, there are no stores open right now. So
yeah,
it's been sort of a pivot to how do I, the strategy angle, and how do I help people rethink how they're going to come back.
yeah,
Uh, and so I've been talking to some people about that. I mean, it's hard because they don't really know how much to invest in these sort of sanitary measures because they feel like it could be 3 months of it, it could be a year of it, it could be 2 years. People could act this way forever. So they don't know, like, is it worth adding all these things? Is it worth redesigning my store so that it's permanently socially distanced
yeah,
if, we don't know how long it's going to be? Plus, a lot of people are like, I have to pay my rent too, so
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have all this money to throw around. So I think that's interesting. There hasn't been like a ton of work for people like me that are like rethinking the whole package, but there
Yeah.
has been like smaller
You're not
conversations
going to
and
write a
strategy.
book.
I mean, yeah,
All that time
not
indoors
in.
is a great chance to tone up. I mean, this article was brilliant. You
Oh,
have
thank you. No, I mean, I think everybody feels this pressure of, oh, I have to write a book right now. I have to do all this stuff right now. No, you just have to survive. That's what getting sick like taught me. It was like, no, you just have to survive this virus and then, get back to maybe rethink what you're doing a bit, but
Yeah. No,
just make it through.
I got you. So, if you were to offer some words of wisdom to some of the retailers who listen to this podcast, as we sort of look at wrapping up, are there any? I mean, obviously, go out and buy the Harvard Business Review and read the article, or look at it online. But are there any other areas that? Actually, when did you write the article?
I wrote it in April.
So it's just after.
It
Okay.
takes a little bit of time to get these things out into the world.
Yeah.
So I was frustrated. I mean, no, the Harvard Business Review are amazing. They're so helpful. I was feeling like, oh no, this is going to be stale by the time it comes out
No.
because
No.
everything's changing so fast. So I think that it's always hard. I'd love to hear, what other retailers are thinking about. And I continue to read a lot about like how people's thoughts are evolving. I think it's going to be super interesting the next few months, at least here in New York and other places where it starts to open up a little and
Yeah.
there's all this sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Do people actually enjoy it? Are there things that are better now than they used to be? Are there
Yeah.
things that are worse? So, I guess a word of advice maybe is just that it's really a chance to take a step back. I think there are plenty of retailers, especially in sort of the essential category, who probably rightly are like, let's just throw things up as quickly as we can, get these partitions and these stickers on the floor, and this will make sure, we can get through this. But if you do have more time on your hands, to really rethink what does your store mean for your brand and what is that experience you're creating for people, and how can it be distinct? How can it be different? How can it be something people actually want to go out of their way to experience rather than just a transactional, I'm going in to buy a product.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you're going to have plenty of people who won't be in your store for a year or two. So what are you going to do to translate those feelings onto your digital platforms? And maybe experiment.
When you look at your sort of focus now, what are you focused now? What are you focused on now?
So right now I've been having a lot of early conversations. I mean, it's been interesting because without like the physical activity of building a store to focus on some of the conversations I've been having. It's a chance to really take a step back, and that's been really interesting across fashion and beauty and concept stores, different retailers, and also just brands in general, thinking like, how do I exist in this world after? And a lot of them, I'm very encouraged, are sort of like, let's throw out the old model, let's completely rethink this.
Right.
And when I switched from, I had worked in innovation consulting for a long time, talking about big structural change in industries, and with whether it was a pharma company or government entity or a nonprofit, how do you adapt to a changing context? Suddenly that work's coming right into what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a nice way to sort of marry the two things I've been working on over the last 5 years or so, like, taking a step back and thinking about strategy. And I think in that way, maybe what I'm offering is unique in being able to be strategic, but then physicalize whatever we talk about. Yeah. So I'm hoping that those conversations will lead to new stores that totally break the model.
Do you feel that in terms of the pop-up element will still continue, or will actually outpace so people will go more into pop-ups rather than like long-term visions of a store lasting whatever the cycle is, 10 years, 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was already symptomatic of what was happening in real estate. There was a lot of hesitancy to sign a 10-year lease, and a pop-up was the chance to like test things out. And especially if you're going after like Instagram posts or just brand awareness, a pop-up can be plenty. But I think it will depend on how the real estate market responds to all of this. I think if rents do come down, you might see more stores come back. I think if rents stay really high or there's a lot of vacancy, it could be a chance for more and more pop-ups. I do think there is some like things are just a little more transparent. People are paying attention more now. So like the environmental waste that comes with a pop-up is insane. And it's something I think about and want to do better at. How do we design things that are more sustainable?
Yeah.
So it might be, some brands are like, yeah, let's do it. Others are like, we don't want to waste this much. We can do something online.
Yeah.
Or reuse a venue that's already there.
Yeah, it's an interesting comment. I actually have this discussion about the circular economy with someone, or the environment, and they were saying, well, they felt that would take second place in this sort of world that we're living in. And that sort of went against with what I thought, because I thought if we're living in a kinder, better world where people are reflecting, then the environment has to be higher up on the ranking of how we treat the planet and what we do around it. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been some just like practicality of like, even if you ideally would not want to shop at a giant like Amazon, you're like, I need this sanitizer or this mask and I need it now.
Yeah.
So there has been some, but I think that, people are definitely paying attention more. And I think people are expecting more of the non-essential brands.
Yeah.
They're saying, well, why am I going to you if all of the things you're doing are hurting the planet, socially not very progressive? Should I be spending my money with you now that I've realized I maybe don't need what you're selling?
Yeah.
So I think there has been a flight towards like brands that are putting their actions behind their words and saying, we're not just going to throw something up for Earth Day and throw something up for Black Lives Matter and call it a day. Like people are double checking, hey, have you actually done anything since this?
And do you see them as themes that will stay beyond this period that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was already a generational shift that was happening, and I think the good power of the internet is it's more democratic, and now these voices are getting heard. And I do think, although sometimes I wonder because, there's some brands that have been canceled, and I still see people shopping at them as if they forgot. So, and that was like before this was a bigger movement. So I don't know. I'm curious. I think a lot of people will shift their behaviors.
Yeah.
But I do think, sometimes there is a short memory and sometimes people don't, for whether just don't really dig to the meat. But there will definitely be a significant group that's more conscious about their consumption.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I genuinely feel your perspective, the angle that you approach it from is really unique. And that's what I think people, especially in these times, they need that sort of alternative opinion or that sort of different approach to some of these legacy problems that aren't necessarily new. I don't think some of the things that we've gone through are new. I know the pandemic is in a sense, but the fact that spaces have needed better design for such a long time, and to see your fresh take on it has just been a real pleasure. Where can people find out more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, they can go to my website, katemachtiger.com, or my studio's website, extraterrestrialstudio.co. You can follow me on social media. I'm Kate T. Gray on everything.
What I'll do is in the show notes, I'll actually put the links to your studio and your website, so people can, because it's definitely worth having a look at some of the work that you've done, some of the pop-ups that you've been involved in, and to follow you in the future. Kate, thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
My pleasure.
The Retail Podcast, a global conversation hosted by Alex Rezvan Viennet.